In this episode, we speak with Dr. John Parker, who received his PhD in archaeology from UCLA. His dissertation research focused on changes in settlement patterns in the Clearlake Basin during the past 12,000 years. The focus of this interview covers the Bloody Island Massacre that took place on May 15, 1850 in Clearlake, California. Using science, archaeology, state records, and eyewitness accounts, the Boxcar Joe Show dives deep into the dark reality of the events that led up to a California genocide of the Pomo people.
Are we live? Okay.
Hey.
Welcome to this edition of the Boxcar Joe Show. Today I have a special guest. I want to welcome Dr. John Parker. How you doing, John?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. And just give the audience a little visual since this is an audio podcast. We are on Dr. Parker's deck in his beautiful home here in Kelseyville, and we are overlooking Clearlake, and it is a beautiful, beautiful day. And we're going to get into a very sensitive topic and a very solemn event that happened in our history. And I just want to give fair warning to any of our younger audience listeners out there that you're going to be exposed to some very harsh realities, and but we both feel it's necessary to talk about this and to inform the public to the best of our knowledge what actually happened out here. But before we get into that, I would like to introduce our guest today. Archaeological Research Director John Parker received his PhD in archaeology from UCLA in 1994. His dissertation research focused on changes in settlement patterns in the Clearlake Basin during the past 12,000 years. He has worked as a professional archaeologist for 51 years, 30 years in Lake County and 20 years in San Luis Obispo County. During that time, he has specialized in cultural resource management and has held archaeological positions with Caltrans, Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Forest Services, and city and county agencies. Dr. Parker has nominated 54 Lake County historic and prehistoric sites to the National Register of Historic Places and was able to get $4 million in state appropriations for the purchase, preservation, and interpretation of 38 of those sites as the Anderson Marsh State Historic Park. He has developed and run archaeological education programs for elementary, secondary, and college students, Native American groups, the general public, as well as for federal, state, and local agencies. His work has been seen on PBS, CBS Evening News, Good Morning America, CNN, and in newspapers and magazines such as People, Newsweek, Archaeology, Omni, Westways, American Film, Instructor, Sunset, California, and Preservation News. Let's welcome Dr. John Parker to the show.
Wow, this guy sounds pretty amazing.
Did I miss anything?
No, I think you hit it all.
All right. So before we get into the meat of the topic, I'd like to know a little bit about you, Dr. Parker. Share whatever you feel comfortable with, but what was your childhood like? Where'd you grow up, and how'd you get into this field?
Yeah, well, I was born and raised in San Jose, and when I was a kid growing up, we would come up to Blue Lake every summer and vacation for a week or two. My grandparents lived in Petaluma, so we'd come up to Clearlake during the Easter week to fish for crappie and bass, and so I've known this lake and this area, all my life. My great grandfather actually owned a winery over in Geyserville during, but he went bankrupt because of the 1920s, the Prohibition. And but my mom was raised over there. My mom's still alive. She's living on Clearlake on Cache Creek down here. She turned 94 last month.
Wow.
And when she was a kid, she walked across the Golden Gate Bridge back in 1937, I think, when they first opened it, and the whole community had a big walk across the bridge. And 2 years ago, she walked across it again at the age of 92.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was she's an amazing lady. she taught me a lot about it's the moral system that I have. You know, my dad was an educator. He taught teachers how to be teachers at San Jose State. So when I was growing up, he would always try out his teaching stuff on me. You know, I mean, you know, we'd make a volcano that erupted and, you know, all that weird stuff.
You were the guinea pig.
I was a guinea pig. He did a lot of outdoor education, so I was hauled out to the woods, you know, and I probably held my first snake when I was 5 years old. And we'd go over to the coast, tide pooling and stuff like that. So I kind of grew up with an outdoor sense. And from both of them, I got my worldview. And basically, what I've been doing my whole life is I realize that we are all only here for a short amount of time. And you can't own this place. You can borrow it. And what I've always tried to do my whole life is try to make this place a better place for those that come after us. So this is what we have. This is what we got when we were born here. So before we leave this place, let's try to make it a little bit better for those that come after us. And that's how I live my life, and that's how I try to pass that on to everybody I meet.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So was college kind of expected of you in your household? Was that something that it was a non-negotiable?
It was kind of expected of us, yeah, but of me. You know, my mom spent a few years in college. My dad went through, got his PhD at Stanford, which is really bizarre because when he was a kid growing up, he was a migrant farm worker. And for instance, in junior high, he went to 8 different junior high schools because his family was following the crops up and down California. And he went on to get a PhD at Stanford. So it was like, wow, you know.
Right.
But yeah, he taught me that work ethic, you know, when I was a kid in San Jose. Back in those days, it was all apricot orchards and cherry orchards. And summertime, I'd pick apricots or cut apricots for drying and stuff. But he taught me that work ethic. And yeah, college was it was yeah, you're going to go to college. Oh, well, okay, I don't know. You know, I mean, I had my choice. But he said, you know, as long as you're in school, I'll pay your car insurance for you. So I said, okay, yeah, that sounds good. I stayed in college for 14 years.
Hey, you got to make it worth it, man.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So
but, yeah, it was but it was fun. You know, I went to Sonoma State University, and that was like a blast. I mean, this was during the hippie days. I was living in a school bus, long hair, beads, you know, the whole thing. And in fact, the Sonoma State student body was so liberal, they didn't believe in competition. So instead of using the big football field for football teams, the student body decided to use the football field for rock concerts. So that's what Sonoma State was like back in the 70s.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was cool.
I was given your presentation that you gave. Do you remember when that was, the video presentation you gave, and you had a slideshow? I believe it was here.
The Kelsey brothers.
I think it was here. My sister seen it, and she said, "Oh, you got to see this," you know, because we've heard the story.
Yeah,
we've heard multiple versions of it. There's a very, very powerful song, and I'm trying to track it down. It was mixed with Mildred Duncan's narration to some music. It was called, I believe, the title of the song is called Genocide, and it's very, very sober. It's very sad, and it's her talking about her what was related to her.
Yeah,
and I've always been fascinated with this story, and it's a very well-known story locally amongst the natives here. But you get all these different versions. I really, when I seen your presentation, I like the fact that you're a scientist, you're an archaeologist, you're well-versed in the area and the community. And I reached out to Clayton Duncan as well when I reached out to you. And I was like, it'd be neat to get either both you guys on the same podcast or, you know, interview separately and whatever. But I'm yet to hear from Clayton.
Well, he'll get back to you.
Yeah,
I've known Clayton for 50 years. I used to teach at the local junior colleges here, and whenever I got to that, the lectures about contemporary Native American culture, I would invite Clayton and Jim Brown in to give that lecture, because I didn't grow up Native American.
Right.
I spent a lot of years studying the culture. But yeah, it was a couple of years ago, I think, is when we actually videoed that. I first wrote the talk back in 2012, and I presented it to the Lake County Historical Society at one of their big annual meetings. And I was a little worried that Historical Society members would get up and walk out because it is that it has that much impact, and a lot of the old time ranchers here, they're they want to forget about that.
Absolutely.
And I, when I started working here, I heard the stories all my life, but I never knew exactly what went on, so I decided to dig deep, get everybody's version, and everybody had a different version. And I can't sort through and tell you which version is the right version or the correct version. But so all I did was I just present all the different versions, and then I graphed on a graph how often something was mentioned, and I figure, okay, the higher the bar on the graph, the better chance this is what actually happened. If only one person mentions that something happened, chances are it didn't happen, or it might have. But if you get 5 people mentioning the same thing, then yeah, that probably is what happened. But yeah, it was a fun project to dig into. It was eye-opening for sure.
One of the aims of this talk is not to foster any kind of hatred towards any people group, but I also want to acknowledge and recognize what happened, and this isn't something that I want to arm natives with to feed their anger if they're already angry. Because when I was younger and I was given some of this information just about, the colonization of the country, I read the People's History of the United States. I've seen a lot of documentaries, and one of my first exposures to the ill treatment the natives received from non-natives was in elementary school. And I mentioned it in one of my stories. And back when I was a kid, they have those projectors they used to wheel into the classroom.
Right. Yeah.
And I remember, I think I was maybe 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. I can't remember exactly when, but I remember it was the Lakota Sioux picture where the frozen Lakota people were in the snow, and you had the cavalry there. And I remember looking at that and being impacted by that imagery.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, and then I had this victim mentality growing up.
Yeah.
And that is something that I'm delivered from. And I don't want to foster that or contribute to that in no way, shape, or form. So from the offset, we're going to get into some very traumatic details about what happened. But again, I don't want this to be something that will pit our people against anybody, because that's not the aim of this.
Yeah, no, and it's just historical fact. Every culture has episodes like this, things like this that happen, and a lot of cultures try to sweep it under the rug. And this one's been swept under the rug for a long time here in Lake County, but everybody knew about it. But it just needs to be brought out and acknowledged as part of our past, part of our history. This is where we come from,
I agree.
And as bad as it might be, in fact, anytime I give this talk, I always preface it by letting everybody know you're not going to leave this room with a big happy smile on your face, because this is what really happened. And it's neat. It's traumatic. It's traumatic. And what we're talking about really is the Stone and Kelsey murder, and then the massacre up at Bloody Island. And I started looking into that, and then I realized, wait a minute, what's this other mention that I see of a massacre? It turns out in the 1830s, Vallejo, who had a big spread down in Sonoma County, had a huge grain crop that he needed to harvest. He got 80 of the ranchers down there and a bunch of the Native Americans that had been working for him. And they came up here to basically enslave Native Americans to go down and help him harvest his grain crop.
Mm.
And they came up to the southern end of the lake to the Khoi tribe and went over onto their island political center and asked if they would come and join him. And they said no. But they let him have somebody from the tribe to translate. And then from there, they went around the lake to Elim. And they asked the Elim folks on Rattlesnake Island if they'd come down and help him, with his grain crop. And they said, no, we're not interested. So they went on around the lake and across from Anderson Island or Buckingham Island, which Buckingham Island was the political center for the Kamdot tribe. And they saw all the boats there on the shoreline, and they saw people over on the island, so they waved at them and stuff. And the island people motioned them to come over, so they got in some of the dugouts that were there on the shore and paddled over and tried to convince the Kamdot village to go with them down to Sonoma. And the Kamdot folks were not interested. And so one of Vallejo's men actually speared the Kamdot chief through the chest and killed him instantly. And they managed to somehow get most of the village into the dance house. They blocked the door and set the dance house on fire. Mm. And through the translator, they called through the wall saying, if you guys agrees to come out and help us with this grain crop, we'll open the door and let you out. And from inside, they could hear somebody was saying, we would rather die in here than go with you down to Sonoma County. So a lot of the Kamdot village was just burned in the dance house.
Wow.
The reason we know this is because one of Vallejo's men kept a diary of that trip, and he was there, and he actually wrote specifically what was being translated, what they were saying. He says in his diary, you could hear the crackling of the bodies as they burned. And it was like, that was, and I didn't even know about that massacre.
Yeah, I didn't know about it until I heard your talk.
Yeah, and so I got out my map of the area, and I said, okay, well, they went to here, and then they went around to here, so I mapped out his whole route. And, of course, the people from Elim, who have a perfect view of the Kamdot Island, saw the flames, and so they all grabbed their bows and arrows and, we're heading out after Vallejo. Vallejo and his men hightailed it back to Sonoma County as quickly as they could. They all got on their horses and took off, and he never came back here. Mm. That's when he decided he was using the Clearlake Basin as a big, huge cattle ranch, mm-hmm. And that's when he decided that he didn't want to be back here anymore. He had vaqueros round up most of his cattle and move them out of the lake basin, and then that's when he sold the grazing rights and the rest of the cattle to Charles Stone and Andy Kelsey.
Okay, so we're getting to the place that I want to kind of focus in on. I'd like to, if we can, as best we can, go through a chronological timeline of events from. That was a good starting point. So they're already, massacring tribes.
Right.
Yeah. They couldn't recruit for slave labor. They got their cattle out here grazing on. I'm pretty safe to assume their hunting grounds and different gathering areas, and this part of California was still controlled by Mexico at that point.
Yeah.
Okay. Who was Benjamin Kelsey and Andrew Kelsey? Who were they?
The Kelsey family, I picked them up in Missouri. And in Missouri, they were gangsters. They would squat on people's property, and then they would file a claim for that property. even though it wasn't theirs to claim. And they got kicked out of a couple of towns in Missouri for doing this. One of them actually, and I don't remember which of the two, killed a man and was taken to court, and he posted bail, and he jumped bail. And then they decided, okay, we're going to go to California because that's where everything's happening right now. I mean, this is the 1850s, it's 1840s.
So
gold rush was
during
happening.
the gold rush, and
Right.
so I'm sure there was a buzz in the Midwest. Hey,
Yep.
people are getting rich out in California.
Yep.
It was a new frontier. So these guys were rugged outlaws.
Yeah.
Very low morals and ethics.
Right.
Not this really refined, righteous family of white frontier settlers that were just looking for a new beginning. These guys were already involved in criminal activity in their home state, allegedly murdered somebody. And so they heard about fortune to be gained out west. And so was it the patriarch of the Kelsey family or the dad said, hey, we're all going to pack up and go? Or how did that kind of come about?
No, it was the brothers themselves.
Okay.
And one of them was married with a child, I think. And then the other one had his wife with him, but I don't think they had children at that time. And Missouri was the jumping off point for all of the wagon trains heading for California. And the two brothers and their families came to a certain point where the trail branched off, and one trail went to Oregon and the other went on to California. So his brother, Andy, I think, and his wife and child went to Oregon, and the other Kelsey came to California, and actually they were part of the Bidwell wagon train. Because California was part of Mexico, when they got here, they were illegal aliens. And they were actually jailed. The whole wagon train was jailed when they got to California.
Did they end up in Alto? Or what part of California did they end up coming to at first?
They ended up right along the San Francisco Bay Area.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then they were jailed. They ended up being taken to Vallejo's place, I think. And luckily, Bidwell had a friend that was buddies with the Mexican government, so they were able to be released and went about their ways.
So they had Mariano Vallejo and his brother Salvador,
Right.
and they were kind of the governors of this portion of California prior to it becoming part of the United States.
Yeah, Mariano Vallejo was basically the guy in charge of this part of California, and his brother was in charge of the garrison that controlled the law or whatever. I don't know. Yeah.
Right. So who was Charles Stone, and when did he come into the picture?
Charles Stone and his wife were the ones that came across when his brother went up to Oregon. Mm-hmm. He and his wife came across with the wagon train.
Gotcha.
And ended up in Napa. And eventually he went up to Oregon and bought a bunch of cattle and brought them back down. So he and his brother kind of reunited, and his brother came down and lived in Napa Valley also, just south of, up in the northern part of the valley, actually. Mm-hmm. Calistoga, just south of Calistoga. And that's when Vallejo was trying to sell off his grazing rights and cattle up here in Lake County, and he was hoping to sell it to, there was a lieutenant governor back in Missouri. I forget his name now. I should have my paper right in front of me. Huh?
No, that's fine.
And but he wasn't interested. So Kelsey heard about it, and Charles Stone was a buddy of his, and they were in cahoots on a lot of pranks and stuff they were doing. So they bought grazing rights from Vallejo. And a lot of the cattle that were up here that Vallejo couldn't round up just went wild, And so they figured, okay, well, we own those too. Well, the Native American community in Lake County, once Vallejo moved his cattle out, the Native American community assumed that the rest belonged to them.
Right.
So there was some headbutting going on right there. But yeah, Vallejo never wanted to come back here because he had already outstayed his welcome in Lake County.
Right.
Yeah.
I believe this was around 1847, according to things that I've read and researched.
Yeah.
And it was stated that the cattle were kind of roaming free in Big Valley, and like you had mentioned, there was some dispute over the ownership of the cattle.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I wanted to make mention is that the inhabitants of the county, the natives there, were considered owned by Vallejo.
Yeah.
And then when he sold his rights, the land grant and the grazing rights to the Kelsey brothers, they automatically assumed that they inherited those people as well.
Right. Yeah, that was the attitude at the time, that if you owned a piece of property, the trees, the fish, the deer, the Native Americans were all part of that ownership. And so it was no big deal for these guys to go out and say, oh, yeah, you're going to come and work for me on my ranch, because it was, oh, you belong to me anyway.
Right.
But, yeah, it's a different way of looking at the world for sure.
So when they came to this area and they decided to settle here, they got the cattle, the land, and the inhabitants of the land. I remember reading somewhere that they recruited some natives to actually build them. What is it? Adobe?
Yeah, an adobe.
Right.
Yeah. Actually, we should backtrack a little bit because Vallejo never had a land grant here.
Oh, really?
I know. Your eyes are open and it's like, oh, wait a minute, new information. Yeah, I thought so too. And all of the history books talk about Vallejo's Lupiomi land grant.
Right.
But after California became part of the United States, the lands office went through all the land grants because the people that had these land grants needed them to be documented and justified under U.S. law, and they went to court over this one, and nobody was able to produce a signed affidavit saying that this was ever given.
Wow.
To Vallejo. They were able to produce the document, but the signature part was torn off.
How convenient.
So it's like, okay, was Vallejo scamming also?
Right.
So, which is very possible. But yeah, it was, everybody thought he had ownership, so he sold those rights to Stone and Kelsey. And yeah, they moved up here. As far as they were concerned, the Native American community belonged to them, along with the cattle. They when they first moved here, they were very generous with the tribe in Big Valley there, the Hulanapo. And most of the tribal members actually moved their village close to where the Stone and Kelsey were going to live. And yeah, they hired them to build an adobe about 20 foot by 40 foot in size and corrals and everything. And
so the relationship at first was...
Yeah. It was good.
It was good.
It was good. And Stone and Kelsey would, you're welcome to take any of these cattle that you need for food or whatever. So because they no longer needed to hunt, Stone and Kelsey said, well, you guys aren't going to need these bows and arrows anymore. So why don't you just bring them over here and we'll take care of them for you. We'll lock them up here. Yeah. So now the tribe's defenseless.
So do you think that Stone and Kelsey had a plan essentially to where, or do you think this development of their relationship going sour happened over time, or do you think they said, hey, we're gonna go ahead and be cordial and hospitable to these natives, but you know, when we disarm them, we're going to go ahead and implement something that we wanted to do all along? Or do you think this tension gradually developed to the point where it got to?
You know, nobody will ever know. You know, we don't. I don't have a time machine. I can't go back and see. But my perspective, having looked at how these guys were in Missouri, they would plan ahead. You know, they would squat on somebody's land for years and then preempt it.
Right.
So I wouldn't put it past them to plan that all out, plan ahead like that. Okay, if we make friends and we can get rid of their weapons, then we're in charge and they have to do what we say, you know. So I guess about the same time, Vallejo actually did get them to send some of the Native Americans down to Sonoma to help him build some adobes down there as well.
Right.
In fact, Clifford Salvador was one of the Native Americans that went down or worked at Vallejo's, and then he escaped and came back. But yeah, he was one of the tribal chairmen up here.
Oh, okay.
You know, then things just got crazier and crazier. I mean, these guys were not well. They Stone decided he wanted the chief's wife to live with him. She was 14 years old at the time.
And this was Chief Augustine, correct?
Yeah, and his wife, Upi. And so he basically grabbed her and locked her in the adobe, and she had to stay with him.
Now, was this normal practice? Because I've heard, again, with Stone and Kelsey, that they were prone to do this. They would just take young girls from the tribe, pick and choose and against their will.
Yep.
And take them into their adobe. And
yeah, and if a parent, you know, if a mother or father wouldn't agree to that, they would take the parent and hang them up in a tree by their thumbs or whatever, so their feet were barely touching the ground, and leave them there for like a week. You know, it was just a typical thing. We do have diaries of people that visited Stone and Kelsey. And these diaries talk about how they would, just for entertainment, they'd bring, you know, a couple of the Native Americans out and just shoot at their feet to get them to dance as an entertainment. And any transgression at all, no matter how slight, you'd be hung up in a tree, you know, by your thumbs or whatever. And that was a pretty standard practice, according to the guests that came and visited Stone and Kelsey.
So during this time, how many natives do you think approximately were part of this community?
I have no idea what the size of the village was at that time. By the time they moved into this area, smallpox and all of these diseases has already swept through, so most of the villages in Lake County that originally would have had 300 to 400 people had half of that number of people. At least half of the population died from those diseases. So you're looking at a village of maybe 150 at the most, maybe less, I don't know. Yeah.
So at some point, the cattle was not being offered, and they were given rations of 4 cups of wheat.
Yeah.
Per family or something like that, to where it was like you couldn't survive off that.
Right.
And essentially the natives were getting abused in every way, shape, or form. They were being starved.
Yep.
And deprived of I'm assuming religious practices.
Yeah, I imagine.
Yeah, and so and you know, their daughters were being taken, and then just ill treatment from these 2 gentlemen, and unarmed and unable to defend themselves at this point.
Yeah.
Share with us what you found about the day, the night they developed a plan to go out and say, "Hey, look, we're starving. We need something to sustain ourselves. Let's go and let's go get a head of cattle during the night unbeknownst to Stone and Kelsey, they'll be none the wiser. We'll come back, we'll return the horses, and we'll have some food.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing that broke the camel's back, I think, the last straw, if you want to call it that. But even leading up to that, as soon as gold was discovered over in the Sierras, Stone and Kelsey decided, we're going to take 50 of our Native Americans here and go up and dig for gold.
Was this up in the Sierras or Calusa area?
Yeah, up in the Sierras. There's actually, if you go to one of the historic maps, you'll actually see something marked on there that says Kelsey's Diggings. And they brought back, a couple of sleeves full of gold dust and used that to buy a bunch more cattle. And then a year or two later, actually everybody got back safely. There was no problem. They actually gave the Native Americans that went with them got some overalls and a shirt, I think, as payment for.
Yeah, I heard like a handkerchief or
something crazy. And then a couple of years later, they decided to do it again, and they got some of their wealthy friends to sponsor their expedition. They bought tons of supplies and headed up there again with another group of 50 and realized they could make more money selling the supplies to the miners than actually mining themselves. So they did that, and then they packed up and came home and left all the Clearlake Native Americans up there in Sierra Miwok territory, and the Sierra Miwok and the Pomo were not friendly to each other. And at that time, gold miners would shoot a Native American as quickly as they'd shoot a bear. And apparently only one Native American from the group of 50 made it back to Lake County alive. And that was pretty close to the last straw right there when the word got out about that. So yeah, they were just left up there in enemy territory with no supplies, nothing.
So they seen no positive outcome in this relationship with these two men.
No.
Something had to be done.
Yep.
And one of the stories I heard again was, they had a meeting and
they decided let's take one of the cattle and at least have some food, So two of the men got horses and chased down a cow and had it, I guess. And then one of the guys hopped off his horse to tie up the cow, and the horse took off. And that's what kind of set off Stone and Kelsey, because the horse was missing. What's going on? We're gonna, somebody's gonna have to pay for this. And I guess from there it gets a little fuzzy. One Upi, who is probably the best, most accurate person as far as relating the story. We don't have her words exactly from her, but she lived with one of the ranchers in Big Valley for the last years of her life, and she told this to the lady, the ranch lady there. And this is what got written down by Henry Malden, the county historian. And she says that they were going to have a big ceremony, and Stone and Kelsey allowed Upi and the other girl that were living with them out to join the ceremony, and that's when the plan was hatched to take them out. And the plan was that Upi and the other girl were going to pour water into the barrels of their guns so they wouldn't fire. And then in the morning, when they all came out, Stone and Kelsey would come out with some broth and build a fire for the Native Americans to eat. And when they came out to do that, they were going to ambush them. Yeah. So that's my guess is that's probably the best version of what actually happened. Everybody's everybody's got a different version. There's like 6 or 7 different versions. And anybody who wants to can go online and get my paper, which talks about all of this.
Yeah, I'm actually going to link your talk.
Oh, cool.
To this podcast, so anybody who is interested will be able to go on there, go to the description of this podcast, and we're going to link Dr. Parker's lecture on the events, and you can look at the graphs and the charts and all the research that he put into this massacre. So the plan was hatched.
Yep.
They came out in the morning. Then what happened?
Then you get a lot of different versions. One version is the couple of the people from the village stabbed Stone with his own knife, but apparently he made it back to the adobe and went upstairs, and apparently he died up there, or fell out the window. I don't know. There's another story that talks about one of them being hit over the head with a rock. There you start getting like 5 or 6 different versions of the actual murder that happened. One of them, I guess, indicates that one of the guys was chased into Kelsey Creek, and he was begging one of his friendly Native Americans, "Please save me, hide me." And the guy said, "Well, it's too late for that, And another guy came along and said to his wife, "This is the man that killed your daughter. Why don't you take care of him?" And so she smashed him in the head with a rock, or stabbed him or something. I don't know. But yeah, there's all these different versions about what happened next. But the outcome was both of them were killed. The tribe got all of their weapons back. And I guess there was a rancher nearby that saw what was going on, and so he hopped on his horse and rode down to Calistoga and got in touch with Andy Kelsey. And Andy Kelsey put together a posse to come up and deal with the problem.
So how long after the murders, and what was the time span between when the actual murders happened and when he was notified that something had happened?
Probably within a couple of days.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that long of a ride from here down to Calistoga. And he got a bunch of people together to come up, and this is before the military got involved. And they came up, and they didn't do anything because I don't know whether the village was abandoned at that time, or whether there were so many armed Native Americans they didn't figure they had a very good chance. So that's when they sent down to get a hold of the military and see if the military would come up and take care of the problem.
And this was the actual United States Army? Are we talking about that?
Yeah. Captain Lyons.
Right. Nathaniel Lyons,
yeah. At that time, the capital of California was Benicia, and that's where the military was located. And so that's where they left and came up. When they got up here, they realized, no, there's nobody here. I mean, word got around the lake just instantly that this was going to turn into something bad. So all the villages around the lake, they headed probably up to their acorn collection camps, which are usually in the uplands, away from the lake. So when Captain Lyons and his crew got here, there was nobody to be found around the lake. From the Native American perspective, there's an indication that they had lookouts on Canocti and different places to report on where the military was to the rest of the people in the area. So they marched around the lake to Upper Lake, which is where they found the folks on Bloody Island. Badonapati was the village name. It was that time of the year when they were all on the island fishing, and they were so far away from Big Valley. They figured, this is what we do this time of the year. We're going to do it, and so they set up. They brought up a howitzer, which was a kind of an overland cannon that you could take, you could pull behind a horse over really rugged terrain. A mountain howitzer, it was called. They set it up across from the island and started shooting at the island, but they were too far away. So once the Native Americans on the island realized that, they would just all come out and say, you can't get us. So that's when Captain Lyon sent back for a whale boat to be brought up over Mount St. Helena. And so they just put a big wagon, they put a whaleboat just on a wagon carriage thing and hauled it over the mountain. They had one group go around the Big Valley Lakeport side of the lake, and the other group took the boat and went up the center of the lake. They already had the howitzers up there. So they started shooting the howitzers to get all of the Native Americans on that side of the island watching the guns. And then the whale boats with the military guys with their muskets came up on the other side of the island and got out. It just basically wiped everybody out. These are like one-shot rifles. So you shoot it once and you can reload, but it takes you a minute or two to reload. Or you can just use your bayonet and keep killing people that way. So that's what they did. Now, the cannons, the guns were shooting chain shot, which is you've got a canister, two canisters connected by a chain, and when you shoot it, it spins around in the air as it goes through the people, and it just takes off limbs and everything. It's a personnel shot. It's not for shooting holes in a sailboat. It's for shooting holes in people.
Right.
And so it was. They were getting it from both sides. But and then you talk about this happening, and there's evidence from both sides, the Native American side and the Caucasian side, indicating that women and children were bayoneted, and it's just horrendous to think about, I mean, and even before that happened, as Captain Lyon and his group were going around the lake, heading up there the first time, they stopped at a village in Scotts Valley and just decided to start shooting their howitzers at the village and basically destroyed the village. They took a hostage from the village with them up around to Upper Lake, basically interrogated him for information and then hung him up on a tree and burned him. Just lit a big fire under him. And, that was just what was going on, So, yeah, it's hard to even imagine. I mean, and then you start getting into, okay, Captain Lyon says his version. We killed at least 400, savages and all well-armed Native Americans, And, but if you talk to Augustine, the chief of the tribe, he says, oh, no, only about 16 people died. Everyone else was able to hide in the tules and escape, the damage. And you think about it on today's level. I mean, you're talking about wars around the world. Every group uses publicity to say, "Oh yeah, we made out okay here. We didn't, those other guys, they lost tons of people. I know, we know, So both of those things you kind of have to take with a grain of salt. I suspect more than 16 people died. I suspect, but I'm sure it wasn't the whole village of braves, as Captain Lyon said.
So they were just indiscriminately murdering young children, women, elders,
everyone.
It wasn't a war, it wasn't a battle or a conflict. It was a straight massacre.
Yeah.
And in the song I mentioned earlier in the podcast that Mildred Duncan was narrating, she was mentioning how her grandmother used to cry around a fire, retelling the story as she was there. And she said that they came and killed all the pomos, and they were bayoneting children, throwing them into the lake. The lake turned red from the blood of the people. And her grandmother and great-grandmother had actually ran into the lake and survived by breathing through tule reeds.
Yeah.
Did you hear anything, something like that happening, or?
That's one of the stories, one of the versions that I've heard, and I have that listed in my graph, and it might have happened, might not, tules, you can't breathe through tules, but if there were bamboo or something like that, you could, yeah. It's definitely possible, but even if you couldn't find something like that to be under the water and breathe, if you've been into the tule marshes around this lake, you can hide very easily in tules and nobody will see you. Mm-hmm. They grow 6 feet tall out of the water and they're dense. Mm-hmm. And if you can make it into the tules, I think you're pretty safe.
Dr. Parker, recently, my wife and I went to go see a movie called Horizon, an American Saga, starring Kevin Costner. And it's about the American frontier going out west and a lot of battles with the natives in their journey. And in this one scene in particular, the wife of Kevin Costner, the character, her name was Frances, and their cabin was being circled and burned by a native tribe that they were settling land on. He opened up the floor and instructed his wife Frances and their daughter to hide in this crawl space they had dug. And they were down there while the natives were attacking their cabin, and the air was they were basically suffocating under there. And so they used the shotgun barrel and shoved it through the ground to breathe.
Huh.
And I thought, I seen a parallel there.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Methods of survival.
Yep.
The natives, whether it happened or not, they used nature to survive.
Oh, yeah.
And the American used weaponry to survive.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was a very interesting parallel from the story that we're discussing today in this movie that I recently watched.
Yeah.
I don't know if they researched it or anything and heard or whatever, but and again, it's just an observation. It's not an indictment against anybody, but I just thought it was a pretty bizarre parallel to the survival of the Bloody Island victims. So once the massacre happened, and again, we can camp out here for a long time discussing what could have happened, what did happen, what didn't happen. But the fact is that many
it happened.
It happened. Many Native American women and children and elderly and men lost their lives.
Yeah.
Where do we go from here? So Stone and Kelsey are dead. The brother comes and exacts revenge with this death squad, essentially.
Right.
Indiscriminately massacring any natives that they come across.
Yeah, he went back to the Napa Valley. He was so incensed about what happened up here that he's put together basically a death squad. I forget what they were called, the Napa Rangers or something. I think
the Sonoma Rangers.
Sonoma Ranger, yeah. And he alerted all the ranchers in the Napa Valley that if you have Native Americans that work for you or work on your ranch, keep them indoors because we're going to kill everybody that's out there that's not, So he and this group went up and down the Napa Valley just indiscriminately shooting Native Americans. And finally, a rancher got so pissed off at what they were doing that he reported them, and they were arrested and thrown into jail. But jail in this early California, where Benicia was the capital, the jail was actually the brig on a big sailing ship out in the bay. So they were thrown in there, and they were granted bail. And they jumped bail, and they saw a newspaper article for a fast schooner that was heading up to Humboldt Bay. So they hopped on that schooner and went up to Humboldt Bay. And they established the town of Union and continued killing Native Americans up there. Yeah.
So nobody was held accountable for this.
No.
And, there's a quote from a philosopher that I listen to, Dr. Cornel West, and he says, justice is what love looks like in public. And so it's fair to say that the natives were getting no love whatsoever during the early formation of this state of California, and the treatment they were on the receiving end of was a nightmare.
Yeah.
Which leads me to my next question, Dr. Parker. I would like to hear your thoughts on historical trauma. Are you familiar with that term?
Not really.
It's basically to give you just a thumbnail. What it means is just basically it's a theory that was developed, and I can't remember her name. It was a Native American woman, but it's about the loss of people, land, and culture, and how that can. I think she studied the descendants of the Holocaust and kind of overlapped that with the plight of the Native American, and developed this theory that historical trauma can be passed down from generation to generation.
Oh yeah.
I don't know. What are your thoughts about that?
I would have to agree. Absolutely. There's so much of what you are came from your parents and your grandparents. So, you take up part of their being, I guess, so you could call it that. And and if you have that kind of a trauma in there, it's going to definitely come down to you or me or whoever, So yeah, that makes perfect sense. I never really thought of it before, but I'm sure that the Holocaust survivors and their descendants have that kind of historical trauma. I know that some of the Native Americans in the Upper Lake area have that from the Bloody Island Massacre, and probably over at Elim from the Camdot Massacre, because the few people that were left from the Camdot village ended up moving to Elim. So yeah, but I can't conceive of it because it's not part of my family history, but it makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Doing a little reading in preparation for our interview today, Dr. Parker, I came across some information that there's a movement currently, and I don't know what the status of it is, if it's resolved or not, but I know there's a group of people that are campaigning to rename Kelseyville to Canocti. Are you familiar with this?
Yeah. In fact, I gave my presentation about the Kelsey brothers to that group at one of their public meetings. Yeah.
What are your thoughts about it?
I like it. I live here on the north slope of Canocti, and I think Canocti is a suitable name for that town. It's had different names in the past. It used to be, this mountain here back in the 1800s was called Uncle Sam Mountain, and the town down there was called Uncle Sam. And then it was called Kelsey Town, and it was changed again to Kelseyville. So it's never been a permanent name. It has been for the past, 100 years. But yeah, no, I think Canocti would be a great name for the town. You're never going to get rid of that history. Even if you change the town's name, that history is still going to be there. I know a lot of proponents of keeping the town's name Kelseyville are proponents because they don't want that history to disappear. Well, I guarantee you it won't disappear. Naming a town after a geographic location, like this mountain here, is something that's done by a federal agency, which is called a Geographic Names, agency or whatever. So you have a lot of local people that are upset about having the name of the town changed to Canocti. You have the group that's behind changing the name to Canocti. A lot of the locals have gone to the supervisors, asking them to make the decision. And the supervisors decided, we don't want to be put in that position, so we're going to throw it back out to the voters. But when it comes down to it, neither the supervisors nor the public have the ability to make that name change. It's the Geographic Commission of the federal government that makes that change. Now, they'll listen to recommendations from the supervisors or the locals, whatever. It's not something that the locals have the ability to do.
Right.
Yeah. So it's going to be interesting to see where that goes. So I have to make new business cards. Big deal.
Right.
It doesn't bother me at all. And I think it probably is more appropriate to have it named after the volcano that's been here for 600,000 years. Yeah.
Dr. Parker, we're going to wind this interview down. I'd like to thank you for your hospitality, for opening your home to us. It's beautiful. And I want to give you this opportunity to share any closing thoughts with our audience.
Oh, well, I got to tell you, this place, Clearlake, is got so much energy in it. And, when I was coming up here as a kid, you could feel it. It was just it was an amazing place to be out on the lake, to be in the hills, just experiencing the energy of Clearlake. And then later on, I found out that it's the oldest lake in the New World. This lake has been here at least, well, as you see it now, it's been here 500,000 years. And there has been a lake or marsh here for the past 2 million years. So, the very first people would have set up shop around Clearlake. We already have archaeological materials that date back at least 20,000 years here. We have the oldest spear points in North America found on the shores of Clearlake, 14,500 years old. The people living around the lake today arrived here probably about 14,000 years ago. They married into the group of people that were already here, the Yukian-speaking people, which
Mishua Wapo.
Yeah, the Wapo or Yukian speakers.
Right.
And, and the Yukian speakers are probably the ones that we have the evidence going back 20,000 years or more. I'm sure there's older stuff here. We just haven't found it yet. But from my perspective as an archaeologist studying people and how they relate to the environment and each other, this is the perfect place to study that over time. I don't study the prehistory of this area because I'm interested in artifacts. I study it because I am aware that these people experienced overpopulation twice in the past 12,000 years. And we can learn from how they dealt with that. They also lived through the last global warming cycle, and we can learn from how they dealt with that. They also had to deal with overexploitation of resources and unequal distribution of resources between groups. So, you have all of this knowledge that is here locally, some of it buried in the archaeological sites, some of it in the minds of the elders. And it's all information that can be used to better the world population and some of the problems that we're dealing with on a daily basis. That's why I do archaeology. It's just kind of a side bonus that I get to learn about and become friends with the tribes around the lake and learn, about their more recent history. It's after... When I first got here, I walked over to the reservation, I knocked on a door, and I said, "Here, I'm an archaeologist. I want to study your cultural history. Please let me know if there's anything special that you don't want me to get into, if there's something that you don't want me to step on a particular belief or whatever, let me know. Also, let me know if there's something in particular you want to know about the past. I can focus my research in that area." And I was I was greeted and let in, and we talked for a while, and then I left. And I didn't hear anything for 2 years. And then I got a call on the phone saying, we're having a big head ceremony Saturday night. We want you to come. They watched me for 2 years to make sure that what I had said, I really meant. I mean, if you've been lied to for 200 years by people with my skin color, you're not going to take anybody at their face value. So they actually watched what I was doing and to make sure. And I had no idea, but the door that I'd knocked on was the religious leader of the tribe. And it was his wife that invited me. When I got to the dance house, I mean, I'd heard about these ceremonies. I didn't think I'd ever get to go to one, It was like, wow, There were probably 3 or 4 other Caucasians there, but they all left around midnight. I was the only one that stayed the whole night. The next morning, I didn't realize it. The next morning I was helping her bring in fry bread for everybody that had stayed the night. And this little old lady in the back sees me coming in with this fry bread and says, oh, look, here comes Jesus with the loaves. And everybody in that dance house is like rolling on the floor laughing, and I'm turning all kind of shades of red, because I'm going, oh, wait a minute. I'm the minority in this room. But that was an indication to me that I was accepted by the tribe.
Mm-hmm.
And because, that's when they start joking like that with you, you're part of the community.
That's the telltale sign.
Yeah.
When they start teasing you and then sharing laughter, you're in.
Yeah. So, I've worked with all the tribes around the lake. I have an amazing respect for how well they've done considering the trash that's been thrown at them over these years, I'd love to see them all succeed in whatever they're doing. Yeah. Anyways, thanks for having me. It was fun.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Parker. And I thank you for sharing. And like I said, you're a true ally. And I know with people like you that our history and unfortunately some of the bad things that happen will never be forgotten. We have our elders and we have our storytellers.
Yeah.
But it's an honor to be here with you. And I would like to close by saying that, again, I want to emphasize that the retelling of this story is not to peel off a scab, but it's a sense of healing, to bring it out into the light and to apply some of the healing balm of conversation and understanding. And I would like to address the young Native Americans out there that it's important for us to understand what our ancestors lived through so that we can not only exist, but to live a purpose-driven life, a life of honor, dignity, respect, and strength. And that's what I would like to leave the young people with. And I always end by saying that we all have a story. And Dr. John Parker, I want to thank you for sharing yours with us today.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm happy to. And, like I say, make this place a better place for those that come after us. That's our job while we're here. Yeah.
Oh,